An eyeball covered by a red no sign spins into view. White text on a black background reads, Mason in the dark. A blind man's journey through the wacky world of reading, writing, and other silly bollocks. Brought to you from beyond the black screen. Cut to black. Hello everyone. Mason here. How you doing? Sometimes TV shows are nothing more than light entertainment that allow you to disconnect from reality with hilariously over-the-top characters bantering, falling in love and getting sucked into wacky adventures that make you laugh so hard you get an headache and have to rewind 30 seconds because you missed the next joke. Years and Years is not one of those shows. In fact, this 6-episode limited series written by Russell T Davies, who many of you might remember as the showrunner for Doctor Who before that bastard Stephen Moffat got his filthy hands on it, is more like being tied to a post and beaten by an extremely attractive, charismatic bare-knuckle boxer with enough medical training to keep you alive as they batter your helpless body for a couple of hours. It's reminiscent of Black Mirror with that same gut-churning dread that you either know and love or actively avoid. The difference is where Charlie Brooker draws you into his web of horrific tension by giving us snapshots of high-concept sci-fi techno-dystopias, RTD employs a much more personal approach. During Russell's time on Doctor Who, there was an heavy focus on making the companions feel like real, fleshed-out people with relatably mundane lives and families that occasionally got swept along for the adventure. This gave an element of humanity to a silly sci-fi show about a time-travelling alien and anchored it in a familiar reality. As good as it is, Black Mirror can sometimes feel disconnected. You're dropped into a story, things get weird, and when you're done, you move on. Yeah, there's a wider lore to the universe, a timeline you can scrabble together if your mind can take it, and it consistently presents you with thought-provoking, disturbingly strange concepts that fill you with a sense of existential dread. However, in my opinion, it does sometimes lack that element of realism that can be created through a personal connection. On the other hand, although the show confronts you with and explores some heavy dystopian topics, Years and Years is an intensely character-driven show. It starts in 2019 and follows the Lyons family over the next 15 or so years as the world changes around them. Episode 1 drops you into an uncomfortably familiar version of 2019 with all the terrifying contemporary issues that the world was and still is facing. The shifting political landscape, the climate change crisis, the looming black cloud of another financial crisis, and the increasingly batshit news cycle that constantly bombards us with a new existential threat to be worried about on a seemingly daily basis. We meet 3 generations of the Lyons family, and although throughout the show they do get together occasionally, for the most part they communicate through a family link using a virtual assistant called Senor. Rosie, played by the talented Ruth Madeley, has just given birth to a baby boy named Lincoln, and the show gives us just enough time to settle in, get to grips with the family dynamics, and introduce us to the characters with their various ages, genders, ethnicities, sexual orientations, and political beliefs before fast-forwarding into the future. This flash-forward is shown in the first of many montages, which tend to depict the more personal developments of what's happening to the family throughout the years as national and global events play out in the background through news headlines, which 4 years after the show's initial release can feel strangely prophetic, such as the Queen dying. Alright, I admit that that's a fairly poor example, because let's face it, Russell in 2019 didn't exactly need to be Nostradamus to accurately predict that the Queen was probably gonna die soon, but it's the least spoilery option, and I definitely think the most intense thing about this show is watching the dominoes fall and wondering where the bloody hell it's gonna go next and how it could possibly get worse. The genius thing about Years and Years is that, on one hand, Russell presents us with a world that is unstable and unpredictable before demonstrating exactly how easily and quickly it could slide into a dystopia if we can't get things under control. On the other hand, he gives us a realistic, relatable, engaging family drama with characters that feel fleshed out and believable. Some members of the Lyons family are politicised, opinionated and passionate. Some are fed up with politics and feel a sense of apathy. others bury their heads in the sand to avoid being overwhelmed and frightened. They all have their own backstory with shifting motivations, ambitions, goals, hopes, dreams, fears and struggles. They don't always make the right decision, and the audience doesn't always agree with the things they do or say. They're not flawless, idealistic paragons of virtue that can do no wrong, because they're just people trying to get by in a world that's increasingly difficult to navigate. Sometimes they just don't understand, care about, or even have an opinion on the issues that arise, because at first the events that take place are happening around them, not to them. However, bit by bit, the outside world creeps in, encroaching on this insulated family unit and starts to directly affect them. Even after that happens, they don't and can't know what to do. It seems like things are gathering speed like a runaway train. The characters are losing control, and that leads to some of them feeling lost, powerless, and without hope. Some of the characters are even drawn in by a woman that is arguably the villain of the show. A brash, populist right-wing politician with big dreams by the name of Vivian Rook, played by Emma Thompson, who puts in a detestably fantastic performance. At the end of the day, things are escalating, people are desperate, and Vivian Rook employs an effectively manipulative facade that we've seen time and time again, and unfortunately, we know it works. "Look at me," she says. "I'm one of you. Don't you love the fact that I'm brutally honest? And don't you think I'm brave for saying the things that nobody else dares to say? Vote for me, I represent you, I promise." The plot never stops moving. Even when it slows down for a bit, it's only for the occasional light-hearted moment or to allow the dramatic tension to simmer away until it boils over. Each episode builds to its own compelling climax. Some are personal and some have wider implications, but when the shit really hits the fan, the show doesn't pull any punches, because it can't. If you want to tackle the topics and themes that Years and Years explores, you can't hold back, because it would cheapen the show and lead to hollow moments. Russell's focus on the Lyons family contextualises the events that take place on a personal level. The audience cares about them, so the things that happen matter. When tragedy strikes, when characters make mistakes, when they do or say things that we don't agree with, it has emotional weight to it because the Lyons family feel like real people. I think it speaks volumes that my opinion on the characters changed multiple times throughout the show. There was only really one character that I liked 100% of the time, but that makes sense to me. If the Lyons family existed in the real world, what are the chances I'd be friends with all of them? Throughout all 6 episodes, most of the characters had good moments and bad moments. Sometimes I was proud, sometimes I was exasperated, others I was disappointed and thought they could do better. One character in particular started off as one of the most likeable members of the family, but by the end of the show they'd made so many bad decisions, done some awful things, and developed into a person that I didn't like whatsoever. Even then, the thing that I think is most engaging about that character arc is I hate the decisions they make. I hate the things they do. I can't necessarily bring myself to forgive them, but I do understand why. I was so emotionally invested in this show, just gripped by it, constantly wondering what might happen next, hoping for the best but expecting the worst, and watching as things spiral out of control. Episode 1 opens with something that is so normal, the Lyons welcoming the newest addition to their family, but it ends with something so poignantly terrifying that I was quite literally groaning to myself. Oh no, this is so bad. After that, each episode escalates, and one in particular ends with a moment that broke my heart, both for the characters involved and for the reality of the situation. What happens in that moment happens in real life on a day-to-day basis, and that's insane. By the end of the series, things seem dire, and you're suddenly listening to Vivian Rook rattle off one of the most disgusting speeches I've ever heard a villain give. The thing I hate most about it that really makes my skin crawl is it's so believable. Vivian Rook might be a character in a TV show played by Emma Thompson, but the idea of that character is frighteningly real. Years and Years is great. It's just not fun. But if you're the sort of person that enjoys Black Mirror or other speculative dystopian fiction that tackles heavy topics, I think you'll probably enjoy this show. Unless you're one of the fragile anti-woke snowflakes who get offended by people who exist in real life being represented on screen, because there's lots of diverse representation. It was nice to get some disabled rep. Rosie is played by Ruth Madeley, who actually has spina bifida, but that's not immediately obvious in the show because when we're first introduced to Rosie, the focus is on her as a character rather than her disability, which is how I like it. It's never gimmicky, shallow or patronising. Rosie is just there, and her character is treated with the respect she deserves. There's also a few different examples of LGBTQ rep. One character is trans, and Russell Tovey puts in a fantastic performance as Daniel Lyons. Unfortunately, that does bring me to the one mild criticism I have. It's commonplace in spec fiction stories like this to explore the concept of transhumanism, and as we move forward, I think that's an important issue to tackle. It's certainly something that interests me. After all, I live in hope that one day somebody will cure blindness, and say what you want about Elon Musk, but with the rise of companies like Neuralink and its competitors, that's looking like a very real possibility. The show raises some important and intriguing questions about the future of humanity. Going back to the disabled representation for a second, at one point Rosie discusses how she feels about and whether or not it's a good thing for disability to be cured. That's a nuanced discussion to have that connected with me on a personal level, and I found it very compelling. The world is always changing. Society progresses, and things that once seemed strange and unfamiliar are re-examined and accepted. A point that is perfectly demonstrated by the inclusion of aquamation, a concept that I would have been completely unfamiliar with if it hadn't been for Caitlin from Ask a Mortician. Unfortunately, when it comes to the transhuman issue, I do feel that Russell dropped the ball by drawing clunky comparisons between transhuman and transgender, as if the former is a logical next step to the latter. People assume a character, who we'll call X for now because I don't want to spoil it for you, is transgender. Given the context in show, I think it's a fairly reasonable assumption to make, and to their credit, they're absolutely fine with that. They welcome the possibility with open arms. However, when they realise they're actually wrong and X is transhuman, they're horrified, and they react pretty badly. To them, it's an alien concept that they just don't understand, and they see it as a step too far. Now, I really do think that a concept like transhumanism is an important topic to explore in a show like this. It seems increasingly likely that people will integrate with technology. Not only is that a promising prospect for those in the disabled community like me who would embrace technological solutions, it's also convenient. With the advancement of technology and society's demand for streamlining and convenience, if we're taking a look at the future, these are the discussions we need to have. As it becomes easier to integrate, there will be pushback. There'll be heated arguments between those who think transhumanism is the next step in our evolution and those who think it will rob us of our humanity. Overall, I do think the storyline is an important inclusion, and by the end of the series, it justifies its place within the show, but that doesn't mean the initial introduction isn't problematic. I understand what Russell was trying to do, but in my opinion, drawing that clunky comparison between transhuman and transgender was misguided. It doesn't land the way he wanted it to. Presenting the former as if it's the logical next step to the latter could be hurtful or offensive, potentially even harmful, because it could easily fuel the transphobic rhetoric of the slippery slope fallacy by giving them something to point to and say, "See? This is where we're going." For me, the biggest problem was that it was introduced in such an extreme way that felt like it was there for shock value. Throughout the show, X gets various augmentations, some of which are fairly logical portrayals of near-future technology. Within the context of the show, X comes out, and when that happens, if all they wanted was a simple augmentation, the horrified reactions they receive would have been far less justified. However, that's not how it's done. To paraphrase X, they want to escape the confines of the physical world. They want their consciousness digitalized and uploaded before having their body destroyed, and in the eyes of the people they explain this to, this means they want to die. Obviously, this is an extreme example of where transhumanism might lead, and that's bad. By throwing them in at the deep end, Russell will create a knee-jerk reaction and drive members of the audience to side against X, and I don't think that's what he wanted. If X had started out wanting nothing more than a simple, harmless augmentation, the unreasonably horrified reactions they receive would have made the audience empathise with X and take their side. There's 6 episodes and it covers a decent chunk of time. In my opinion, if Russell had wanted to raise the idea of digital consciousness, he had time to do that. If he'd waited until episode 3 or 4, X's desire to escape the physical world could have been a direct reaction to the events taking place within the show, and that would have been a much more nuanced way of handling it. Despite that issue, I still feel that Years and Years is an excellent show. It's not a passive experience, and it isn't always easy to watch, but it is worth it. I'd say it's one of the best TV shows I've watched in a long time, and it's not something that I'm going to forget anytime soon. The best thing about it is it has a conclusive ending, and I'm grateful for that, because it means I don't have to put myself through season 2. My question of the day is this. If you could have some sort of technological augmentation, would you, and what would you have? Personally, I'd like something that could help me balance, because I can barely stand still without falling over. Why have you done this to me, evolution? Have you enjoyed this video? If so, the like and subscribe buttons are just sitting there, waiting to be pressed. Now press them, or I'll add you to my collection of miniaturized people that I keep locked up in a doll's house. If you've got thoughts to share, or you want to say hi, then you know where the comments section is, and you can find the links to all my social media in the description. Thanks ever so much for spending time with me today, guys. Until next time, take care. For now I'm off, and you should have a good one.